Hello, welcome everyone. If you're here for the Crossfuze ServiceNow Tokyo Release webinar, you're definitely in the right place. So welcome. It's great to have you join us today for a tour of some of the cool new features and capabilities coming to you from ServiceNow and its latest release. My name is Michelle Bidwell. I'm Marketing Director here at Crossfuze. Taking you through our content today will be some of our Crossfuze solutions gurus, David Shirey, the Director of Solutions Consulting, and Jim Pisello, one of our solution consultants. But before we get started and get the content rolling, I wanted to talk just a few housekeeping items through with you. So we want this session to be as interactive as possible, obviously, and there are lots of good widgets at the bottom of your toolbar. If you look on your screen here at the bottom, you will see you have the ability to ask questions during the session, and we encourage you to do that. We will save time at the end of the content presentation today to do a formal Q&A, but go ahead and get your questions in and then stay tuned for that. You'll also be able to submit questions after the session. The widget will continue to work for us on our end so that your questions post-sessions, we can receive them and respond to them afterwards. Another widget, there's also a chat feature at the bottom that can be used to interact with other viewers of the webinar, so feel free to use that. And just so you know, and you're ready for this, there will be a few polls taken during the webinar. So watch for a pop-up screen, a pop-up window right in the middle of your screen, and it'll go away in 30 seconds to a minute. So if you could watch for that and pay attention, we'll be taking some polling. So just go ahead and take a look at any of the other widgets that you happen to see down there and feel free to play around with them. We want this to be interactive, see which ones work best for you. Also, just so you know, this session is being recorded and will be available to you at a later date, so you can reference it in the future as well. So without further delay, I'm going to turn this over to our presenters, our consulting team, and Jim and David, you guys can take it away.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, once again, welcome everyone. What we're going to be doing is jumping into essentially an agenda. Really want to be able to highlight a couple of different key components relative to Tokyo, but at the same time, quiz you as well as provide you with some feedback relative to the upgrade process, when it makes most sense to upgrade to Tokyo, as well as what may be some of those drivers and how best to communicate those throughout the organization relative to when you are making the leap from, say, for example, Rome or San Diego, depending upon which version you're on today, into Tokyo. So the first component here is actually going to be a poll. Really want to get a feel for, how you prioritize when to upgrade. And, if you've got anything relative to a roadmap that you've developed, depending upon your tenure and time on the ServiceNow platform, and how that drives and defines what that roadmap looks like. So give it a couple of minutes for those that are in attendance to provide a yes or a no answer, and then we'll talk about a couple of different key, thoughts you may have or things you may need to consider relative to. All right, I'm going to pivot over to some of the poll results, and looks like not too many people, if any, have any type of a roadmap designed. Really important when thinking about the investment on the platform to be considering, how best to take advantage of that investment. Whether you're part of the early adopter program, which if you're not familiar with, you do have the capability of joining within ServiceNow. It gives you access to essentially what most would consider the beta versions of an upcoming release, but it can give you early access to net new feature capabilities that you may want to be able to take advantage of sooner rather than later. Could be that you're one of those where if you do upgrade, you wait for others to upgrade first so that any kinks in the armor, if you would, any bugs, anything that needs to be provided within a supplementary update to the instance gets handled before, and you want to make sure that you're essentially on the most firm ground, if you would, within the platform. But really developing a roadmap will certainly enhance and ensure that any entitlements you currently own, you're taking full advantage of. So it could be that there are going to be additional features and capabilities that are introduced to, say, for example, change management, if you're in the IT service management space, where they're actually beginning to do analytics around various change models, allowing for you to see success rates as well as bake that into, say, for example, your risk factors in regards to executing targeted types of changes. Or it could be that you might be within the IT operations management space, utilizing ServiceNow's discovery and service mapping capabilities, and now the machine learning components inside of service mapping are actually able to provide you with readiness features to determine what application service you may want to look at conducting a mapping on next. You may be within the strategic portfolio management space, where it allows for you to now look at additional data from a financial perspective within the overview pages, as well as they now have a feature that allows for you to build out your status reporting and push that into a PowerPoint deck if that's more consumable by your user base. So there's a lot of different features and functions that continue to get enhanced and or upgraded, if you would, through these releases. And in developing a roadmap, it certainly ensures that you have the capability of taking advantage of those as you go, as well as looking at it from a platform investment perspective of not just a targeted activity or a targeted module, but looking at how you can grow throughout your organization on the platform itself. Jim, any thoughts there?
No, I want to echo a couple of things that you said there, though. What we often see, you may be aware that ServiceNow has 2 major releases every year, and in between those major releases, they're more and more frequently now putting minor releases, new capabilities into the platform, and typically they're exposing those as applications you can download from the ServiceNow App Store. So ServiceNow is almost in a constant state of upgrades and improvements, but certainly there's those 2 major releases per year that you definitely want to be planning for, so that, as David noted, you can get the maximum value out of your ServiceNow investment. One thing that we have typically seen is that while ServiceNow does have those 2 major releases per year, jumping onto that new release as soon as it drops into general availability isn't always the best strategy. Even though they go through a pretty rigorous early adopter program where a lot of the bugs and kinks get worked out, usually it's not until the first, second, or third patch level, once the release gets into general availability, where you find that they've really worked out all the little minor issues that might cause you some trouble. So I like to typically advise our customers to wait until that first couple of patch levels have gotten into place, so that that release has really matured and is a rock solid release. If you like to be on the bleeding edge, some people do, and we've worked with those customers as well. You certainly can either sign up for their early adopter program, in which case you kind of get to find some of those potential bugs and report them back to ServiceNow, or you can jump in right at the beginning and be one of the first folks to get it in the wild and start running with it there. But typically we like to take a little bit of a more conservative approach and recommend that you wait for a patch of 1 or 2 patch levels in before you start.
Awesome, thanks, Jim. We're going to go to the next slide, or the next poll, if you would. And really, this is looking at it in regards to your current investment, as well as what you may be considering on the platform, just to get an understanding of what you identify as being most critical, as well as how you're prioritizing what you're doing on the platform today. So we'll give that another minute or so. Okay, we're gonna head on over to So it looks like the
ranking poll.
The bulk is IT service management, that's prototypical. Okay, Jim, you wanna?
No, this isn't unexpected. I think the foundation of ServiceNow, going back to its roots in 2006 or 2007, is IT service management. I think that's where most people start with it. So that poll result isn't really a surprise. I would say, however, that ServiceNow does have obviously a wealth of capabilities on the platform. So keeping those other items in mind, even though service management might be the top of mind, understanding that those other platform areas add a lot of value as well to your organization, something that you'll want to keep in the back of your head.
Yeah, good point. So I'm going to move over. We're going to begin talking about some of the net new capabilities and functionality that we intended to highlight during this webinar. I will say that we've built an application that actually allows for us to comb through each release and see how many different net new enhancements or features or functionality or even new capabilities have been implemented. And I think to date, there are 751 that are part of Tokyo alone. So we're obviously not going to be able to cover every single one of those in this session, but as we're continuing to comb through and understand what some of those new features, functionality are, happy to have conversations with you independently, especially if there's anything that resonates both from this webinar and or if you have specific interest based on the investments that you've made and you'd like more detail on what we've uncovered and what we think that might help drive value within your organization. What I'm going to do is hand the driving reins over to Jim. He's going to be covering a couple of topics, and I'll cover a few topics, and then we'll circle back. So, Jim, I'm going to push you forward and let you get started, but go ahead and begin driving when you're ready.
Thanks very much, David. The first thing we want to talk about today, and as David pointed out, there are literally hundreds of new upgrades and enhancements, new functionality that ServiceNow created for Tokyo. We can't talk about all of them, obviously, but one of the big ones that's come out is enterprise asset management. And if you've done any asset management work in ServiceNow already, you know that it has a robust capability around IT asset management. So managing your the assets that you're currently going to, that you're typically going to have within an IT environment. Think servers, infrastructure devices like network gear, end user computers, those sorts of things, cloud infrastructure. What they've done with enterprise asset management is really expanded that foundation to cover any other kinds of assets that you might have within your enterprise. And it might be a little bit difficult to see in the screenshot here, but you can see some examples like medical devices or vehicles, cameras, those kinds of things. Things that you wouldn't normally consider as part of an IT infrastructure, but which are needed for running your business, may have a significant price tag associated with them, may require something like financial depreciation, and things that you want to manage over their overall life cycle. And that's one of the big capabilities that ServiceNow brings in terms of their content service, is that they've gone right out to the manufacturers of these assets and collected data about those assets, including things like standardized descriptions, standardized part information using the UN standard product codes, so that you have apples to apples comparisons when you're looking at different kinds of assets. And also life cycle dates. So when are these items available? What's their expected lifetime? When are they no longer going to be available through the manufacturer or supported by the manufacturer? Those kinds of life cycle dates are really important for being able to make strategic decisions around upgrading your older devices, maybe retiring some of the older devices that might be in your organization, and having that information natively within ServiceNow allows your the teams that use and manage those assets, regardless of what kind of asset they are, to be able to make those strategic decisions so that you're not, for example, blindsided by a piece of equipment that that the manufacturer is no longer supporting, and suddenly you might be in a situation where you have to spend a lot of money to maintain or upgrade those items. So a lot of this will look kind of familiar if you've used ServiceNow for IT asset management. There's a catalog of items that's going to help you manage the life cycle of those different items in your environment. There are lists of, you can list all of your assets. You can see here that many of these are not IT assets. A Lenovo might be a computer, but a Toyota certainly is not an IT asset. So ServiceNow has taken that framework and they've expanded it out so that you can really manage any kind of asset within the enterprise. That's a big win for teams that might not have, say, an ERP system that that could be used to do that kind of asset management. ServiceNow bringing that functionality in makes a lot of sense. The next thing I want to talk about is new industry verticals and data models that ServiceNow has implemented, particularly in customer service management, but this really can be expanded beyond simple customer service management into other service management areas on the platform. And what I want to point you to is this graphic that ServiceNow has provided with the Tokyo release. This has been an evolution over several releases, and it will continue to evolve. But what ServiceNow has recognized is that within given industries, there's specific data that needs to be collected that really is appropriate only to those industries. And along with that, oftentimes there are different security rules that you might need around those. So think about things like personally identifiable information, or in a healthcare setting, for example, things that might involve regulations like a HIPAA regulation, where certain data you don't want necessarily to be available to everyone. So what ServiceNow has done is two things. They've expanded their data model so that within a specific type of a case for a given industry, you might collect slightly different information for, say, the public sector than you would for the manufacturing sector. And so ServiceNow has recognized that and built those varying items into their data model for managing those requests or cases around those types of things. The other thing they've done is created security models for those that are appropriate to those. So, for example, in the healthcare industry or, say, legal services, you're going to find a lot of need for segregating data, where you want only people with certain accesses to be able to see certain kinds of data. And so those security models are also baked into these additional data structures that they've built. The other thing that ServiceNow has recognized is that a business relationship isn't necessarily just between a supplier and their customers. It may be that their customers also have vendors or other customers that they need to think about and consider when they're providing support. So things like B2B2C or fourth-party suppliers are now part of ServiceNow's data model for service management, so that it's not just looking at a two-level relationship, but that relationship can be multiple levels deep. And finally, ServiceNow recognizes that an organization may have external business locations where those individual locations kind of need to manage their own work. And so by building these external business locations into the platform, ServiceNow is allowing things like bank branches, auto dealerships, franchisees to all be able to be managed within that centralized service management application in ServiceNow. But each of those, the work that goes on in each of those locations can be segregated to the support teams within those locations. So there's some data separation there that can be useful for making sure that only the right people are seeing the right data. The last thing I want to point out here, going back to this graphic, is that ServiceNow, you'll notice there's about 10 verticals in green across the top, but there's items highlighted in red on the right-hand side. And these are the items where ServiceNow is really making a major push to address those industry-specific needs within their data model. It's not to say that the items on the left are not important. They are, but ServiceNow is making their major push with the items that are highlighted in red. With that said, I want to note the education vertical here just to the left of this highlighted data, where we see a lot of educational institutions, whether that's higher educational institutions like colleges and universities, or even local school districts, adopting ServiceNow as a platform for managing their faculty, staff, student, and parent relationships. So the fact that something like education falls outside of that line, or any of these other items, the retail and hospitality or energy and utilities sectors, for example, doesn't mean that ServiceNow doesn't have a commitment to them. But if you're looking at one of these verticals on the right, those are the ones where ServiceNow is making a major push to be a big player in those spaces. But customer service and other service management will also support these items on the left. Thanks, David.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next area we're going to talk about is Platform Analytics Workspace. This is a new workspace that was introduced within Tokyo, obviously. And what this does is, with the appropriate permissions, it gives, users the capability of being able to build out a very streamlined capability of building out various dashboards. What's nice is that it leverages not only the more traditional reporting capabilities, but it also utilizes the KPIs and or what used to be or what are still considered indicators within the performance analytics space with the pro SKUs of ServiceNow. It allows for you to utilize those KPIs as well. There's a couple of really cool features that come along with. One of the biggest ones that I found was really the what's called the natural language query. So essentially, as you're beginning to build out a dashboard, you can actually just type in, give me the number of projects based on status, if you would, within the PPM space. It will build, if there's not already a pre-existing report, which it will bring back for you if there are, it will actually build the report for you. So there are no clicks, there are no configuration steps that you need to take. It will automatically build those. The graphics that you see here on the right-hand side, they're actually part of one of our coworkers' development instances where he's going through and kind of data mining and trying to figure out, again, how many, as we see here, how many different releases there are. This is what we're utilizing to kind of analyze Tokyo and holistically. But you can see here the different types of reports that can be built. There's context components which allow for you to be able to drive a purpose behind what the dashboard is meant to, and what informationally the dashboard is meant to provide, as well as the capability of having multiple different report types. Again, kind of a mashup, if you would, of both more traditional historical as well as the indicators from an analytics in real time. And at the same time, there's still tab features, things of that nature within the workspace itself. It utilizes also what's called basically data visualizations, which is kind of a fast track way of building reports. Kind of in the old school, if you're used to the reporting UI, it just enhances that and streamlines that capability. As well as you can see, we've got different types of reports that are more calendarized, pivot tables, so forth, that are all embedded and able to be essentially pieced together within a singular dashboard. So as long as the user has the appropriate permissions, they have the capability of building these. And it just ensures that you have the ability of providing the right data to the right audience, if you would. There are additional components relative to certification. So you do have the ability of building out your own reports and aligning those from a certification perspective with any governance or management structure you may have within your organization. But this is really bringing reporting kind of to the next level within these workspaces. The next topic is document intelligence. So you've got the capability of attaching, scanning documentation within ServiceNow that's inherent. What's coming out with document intelligence is the ability for AI to come into play and for it to actually pull data from a document and then inject that into, say, for example, a record. So for example, would be, I'm scanning in a purchase order. I want to bring in some of that procurement data and actually either populate additional fields that might be within that PO form and or within the actual corresponding assets that might be associated with. Another example could be I'm got part of an onboarding process where I'm, my letter of intent of onboarding into an organization. There may be key details that prototypically either have to be federated in from an outside source and or have to be manually input. Though that information can now be evaluated by document intelligence and pull those data attributes to populate, say, for example, a user record or any other piece of information that you're tracking about a candidate that you're bringing on within the organization. Another key component within this is that it actually allows for those same data values to be injected into a workflow. So it may initiate or it may be midstream of a workflow where there's information that's contained within a document that is necessary in order for the next action or the next task, if you would, to be activated within a workflow. And so you can pull that information utilizing document intelligence, and it allows for those processes to either kick off automatically and or to inject that information where necessary. The key here is utilizing predictive intelligence. It's utilizing the analytics that are already part of the platform, but it's taking those and teaching document intelligence and setting it up from a configuration perspective to allow for it what it needs to based on document type and which process it's a part of. So again, another key feature that's coming out from a Tokyo perspective, you can see here right now what we've been able to identify from as far as document types. These are the three that are documented. As we continue to test this out, this functionality, and make a determination on if there's any expansion there, we would certainly let the audience know. The next slide is kind of a shameless plug. We've got one of our coworkers, Justin Meadows, who enjoys tearing down ServiceNow to its most finite existence and start to figure out and learn everything he can relative to the platform. So he's been breaking down performance or platform analytics for about a week and a half to 2 weeks now. He has a YouTube series where you can easily go in and look at any of these vignettes. It's a series of videos where he breaks down exactly what we just covered, but gives you details on how-tos, how to create, what it takes, and kind of walks you through each of those. He's on YouTube as well as LinkedIn. You're more than welcome to.
Did we lose you, David?
And Jim, I don't know if you can, but my drive is not allowing me to push us forward.
Froze there for a little bit. Let me see if I can go forward. There we go. Our last poll of I think this is our last poll of the day.
We may have one other, but yes.
Okay, perfect. Is this your first upgrade? So this speaks to whether you're a fairly new customer of ServiceNow or a longer term customer. Just interested in taking the temperature of the audience to see whether this is the first time you've upgraded to ServiceNow or whether you've done it before. Give a few, half a minute for that one. Excellent. Another across the board definitive answers. Good. Good to know that the audience here are folks that by and large have been in the ecosystem for a little while. Just circling back to what David mentioned earlier, if you don't have a plan for regular upgrades to ServiceNow, it's very useful to develop one. It's going to help you make sure that you're controlling your own destiny with ServiceNow, so to speak. ServiceNow does have some rules around how far back they'll let you exist with previous versions before they force you into an upgrade. And I can speak from personal experience and say that you don't want ServiceNow planning your upgrade for you. You want to do it on your time frame. Some implications for upgrading your existing instance. Some things to think about are if you've done any heavy configuration or non-standard configurations to your instance, you're going to want to make sure that you have a robust plan in place to do some regression testing on those items. We typically like to advise customers to start in a non-production instance with an upgrade that's been recently cloned from your production instance, so that you're looking at very recent performance of your current iteration of ServiceNow. Upgrade that one so that you're not impacting your production work at all, and then go through the process of thoroughly testing all of the configurations that you've done to make sure that that new upgrade didn't change anything or have any behaviors that you're not expecting. Once you do that, then that's usually a good learning exercise for upgrading your production instance, but you definitely want to do your upgrades on a pre-production instance first, and one that looks very similar to your actual production instance. There's a tendency sometimes in development instances to have a lot of kind of dead ends, or use it like a sandbox in some cases to kind of test out new ideas, which is great, but that can get your development instance out of sync from the behavior that your production instance has. So whatever instance you're using as your non-production instance to test your upgrades should really look like your production instance when you go into that process. Anything you want to add, David?
No, I think you covered it quite well. I appreciate that. So we've got another poll coming. With the upgrade, knowing everyone audience-wise has at least performed at least one upgrade, what's the best way to communicate what's taking place to the user community, and how you're facilitating that? So, how are you making your users aware of the upgrade process, if necessary, as well as the frequency? So we'll go ahead and push to the results and see. Awesome. So everyone's doing it. That's even better. This should make for a pretty smooth transition in regards to kind of some of the things to be considering. Hopefully everyone on the call is doing that. What we see most times with upgrades, obviously, the proverbial want to stay within the boundaries of what ServiceNow requests, basically the ±1 relative to current release. But the other component really is how do we advertise, and how do we gin up excitement where necessary of things that are coming that may be part of that upgrade. So we can call it like a full-on OCM component, but I would think about it more along the lines of how am I ensuring that I'm communicating the different types of value adds that are coming based on that upgrade to my stakeholders, or based to my employees or customers, as well as how are they going to be able to take advantage of it. Whether it be I'm introducing a new enhancement or a functionality that wasn't there before, or whether we're introducing something brand new and we're asking them to take that on as part of the day-to-day job. Properly communicating what's coming as well as what you intend to do within that upgrade space is really important, and it does ensure adoption as well as adaption on the platform. So highly encourage making sure that, and again, nice to see that everyone's doing so, but we certainly talk to our customers about how best to provide those communications, as well as how to make sure that that proverbial what's in it for me is properly communicated to the appropriate audience. Jim, any comments there as well?
Yeah, over communication is probably better than under communication, and having a sufficient lead time with your communications so that you're not piling on a lot of new change to users in a short time frame. So a communication plan is very useful for that. The other thing I would just say is there might be a tendency to want to lump in a bunch of new functionality that you've put into the system along with an upgrade. It's often best to separate those two things so that, again, you're not overwhelming the users of the platform with too much new information at one time, or too much new functionality that's going to make their learning curve steeper for absorbing all of that. As we've noted with each of these releases, there's new functionality that comes out just because as part of the platform release. So if on top of that you're introducing new modules within the platform and activating those, or bringing in brand new additional functionality that maybe your team has developed on its own, that can easily overwhelm your users. So be careful about how you sequence those kinds of things along with those upgrades.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Okay, so we're getting to the point where we're wrapping the webinar, but wanted to make sure we did have time set aside for Q&A. I see one that came into the inbox within the webinar itself from Kim Funk, asking, after ITSM, what is the next logical step on the digital transformation journey, and how does the team determine that? So Jim, I'll let you take first crack, and then I'll fill in where needed, if that works.
Sure. My pat answer is it depends. Every customer is different. Every customer's needs are different. You might have strategic initiatives driving those decisions. All other things being equal, if you've implemented IT service management on the platform, then some of the parts of the platform that directly support IT service management, like operations management, are often a good place to start looking. If your organization is customer focused, though, then customer service management might be the next place you want to go. And the reason I mentioned those two items is they both have strong tie-ins back to service management. Customer service management has a lot of tie-ins to IT service management, particularly if a customer issue ends up, the root cause of that issue ends up being something within your infrastructure that needs to change. There's a great need to be able to tie those in. And additionally, with that same kind of example, operations management ties into that in a big way, because understanding your overall operating environment and how impacts to one item might impact other items in your infrastructure can be really important. So those two areas, I would say, are areas that are ripe for attacking right after ITSM. Asset management also is a good one to consider. If you don't have a way to manage the life cycle of your assets in your organization, then IT asset management or enterprise asset management is a good next step as well.
Yeah, great. I would just bolt on that essentially a lot of organizations, once they've implemented IT service management, they begin to yield the results relative to the various types of transactions that are being logged within ServiceNow, and they're able to compile and build out their metrics. That's essentially where they begin to see deficiencies. And you mentioned it really within IT operations management as well as within IT asset management, having the capability of really getting that 360 view of how they're performing as well as how they're managing from an their IT organization. And then it logically begins to build upon that, as well as, again, as Jim indicated, there could certainly be a strategic initiative that could drive the next area of the platform, whether it's security operations or whether it's HR service delivery. So it really is kind of almost a per organization use case, if you would. But we do usually see most customers begin to branch out and build out their asset, as well as build out their configuration management database, those foundational elements, and then continue to expand from there. The next question that came in is, with the frequency of upgrades, how do you shepherd in those who are consistently change averse? So ServiceNow doesn't necessarily require you to upgrade, at the outset of every time a release is made, as everyone on the call, having gone through that process at least once, is aware. The best thing to do is really relative to, how to, again, as we indicated, communicate to those that are that may be directly impacted by an upgrade, as well as, again, ensuring that as you're going through that upgrade process, that you've got a really good process, really, meaning that it limits and mitigates any impacts, and it ensures that you're able to continue to do work as is while you're evaluating, once that upgrade is completed, what enhancement and or what that new capability you may want to introduce that's you're already entitled to. Jim, I don't know if you have any additional input you want to provide on that one.
Really going to say exactly the same thing. You're not required to take 2 upgrades per year. We have plenty of customers that will only do 1 upgrade a year, or maybe 1 upgrade every 18 months. And what that sometimes means is they're skipping over 1 release and moving to the next one. Usually that's a fairly straightforward and low risk thing to do. Occasionally you might need to think about some additional level of regression testing of your platform in those cases, but you're not required to take those 2 upgrades per year. You can space those out. You can stay 1 release behind. You can get away with being 2 releases behind for a little bit, but again, ServiceNow, they won't let you be any more than 2 releases behind. And oftentimes if you are 2 releases behind, they're going to try to push you into an upgrade. So staying 1 release behind, fairly easy and typical with a lot of our customers. Same thing with the idea of upgrading maybe once a year instead of twice a year. Here's a question asking about the best new feature in Tokyo, or our top picks. You've seen some of our top picks. One thing we didn't talk about that I think has a lot of potential for customers that are using ServiceNow and need also to interact with third-party platforms, but maybe don't want to take on the technical task of building an integration through a third party's application programming interface, or API, is ServiceNow's automation engine. So ServiceNow built automation engine to kind of work hand in hand with their integration hub, which is their pre-built set of integrations with various third-party applications. But in a lot of cases, third-party applications don't have a pre-built integration, or if they have an API, it's kind of hard to use. So what Automation Engine has introduced is something called Robotic Process Automation. And you can think about Robotic Process Automation as a way to automate repetitive tasks that you may need to do, things like filling out a form on a web page, or converting documents from one document type to another. The advantage there is that ServiceNow gives you a design studio that's a low-code, no-code kind of thing, that's somewhat similar to their current Flow Designer or their older workflow engine, where it's a drag-and-drop interface for building out these automations. And the automations can do things like enter keystrokes, open up web pages, open up files on a file share or SharePoint site, create emails. And the benefit that you have there is that those things that you might have to have an operator, an actual human operator doing, spending all of their day doing largely repetitive tasks other than the specific data that they're entering, can all be automated through either an attended or unattended robot that can just go off and do that work on its own. And that can take away that very low value repetitive work, and you can take that person then and give them more value added work to do while the robot takes care of all of that low value stuff. So I think that's one of the big new features. They introduced it, I think, 1 or 2 releases ago, but it's really coming into its own with Tokyo.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, Jim, I'm actually working with a customer now who's implementing asset management. They're utilizing Dell as their primary provider of end user computers. And they have a service tag that is attached to each of their assets. That service tag not only provides the asset information specific in regards to just tracking from an asset tag, but it also provides warranty information associated with that asset tag. or that service tag. So they're actually considering utilizing the scanning capabilities that are part of the agent mobile app to scan those, and then at the same time utilizing RPA to be able to obtain warranty information. If any of you have ever utilized a service tag before, you simply grab that unique ID and you can go to Dell's website and actually plug that in and get additional components or additional pieces of information about that asset, one being warranty. So instead of worrying about trying to establish some type of an integration with Dell or trying to come up with a way by which to get their Dell provider to provide them with a flat file for import, they're considering utilizing RPA by scanning the actual service tag and then automating going to the website location, entering in that unique ID, getting the warranty information, and pulling that and putting that into the asset record as it's being scanned. So RPA is certainly one of the things that we're seeing is going to drive a ton of value and a ton of efficiency within an organization. So I would say that's probably my top as well.
Yeah, I had a customer that was considering building an integration to FedEx so that they could create shipping labels for their products. But when we started, and they wanted to hire Crossfuze to do that integration work, when we started looking at the programming interface that FedEx has, the documentation alone is over 1,300 pages. So just taking the time to ramp up to understand the intricacies of building an integration through their API would have been very expensive and time consuming. Whereas with robotic process automation, you could build a fairly easy flow that would open the correct page, take data, for example, out of a submitted request, and type that into the relevant fields on those shipping label forms right on FedEx's website, and then click the button to print out those labels. All of that can be done automated and electronically without the need for an operator to be opening up that web page every time they wanted to create a shipping label. So that's those kinds of things are perfect use cases for robotic process automation. And they can be tied into every other process within ServiceNow. They can be triggered by creation of a record or update of a record or scanning, as David pointed out. You could use ServiceNow's mobile application to scan those assets, scan the service tag codes, and use that as the trigger to start a robot to do this work. So really anything you can think about where there might be some sort of repetitive work that needs to be done, robotic process automation is a great way to do that.
Okay, that covers all of the questions that were in the inbox. So I think we're going to hand the reins back over to Michelle, if I'm correct.
Yeah, thanks. Anyone else have any more questions to submit? Just a reminder that once we're done with this, you can still use the widget to submit questions and we can respond to them even after the session is over. Also a reminder that this is being recorded, so you'll have access to it to go back and reference it. Do we have any questions from anyone else in the audience? Okay, I guess that's a no. So we want to wrap this one. We really appreciate everyone joining us. We hope you got some value out of hearing about the new features and capabilities. And please feel free to reach out to us with any questions or anything we can do to help you in regards to the new Tokyo release. Thanks, Jim.
Great time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.